one mission. One catastrophic miscalculation. The Black Sea Fleet had been bleeding for months. Sevastopol, once the crown jewel of Russian naval power in the region, had become a liability. Ukrainian strikes had turned the historic harbor into a graveyard of rusting hulks and shattered concrete. Pier by pier, the fleet had retreated eastward, looking for sanctuary in the shadow of Novorossiysk. They thought they had found it. They were wrong. The vessel at the heart of this story is not a Soviet relic. She is not a rusting Cold War holdover patched together with desperation and prayer. The Admiral Golovko is Project 22350. Russia's most sophisticated surface combatant, the ship meant to define the next generation of Russian naval power. Fitted with the Kalibr cruise missile system in vertical launch cells capable of striking targets over 1,500 kilometers away, equipped with Parliament Radar air defense, displacing nearly 5,500 tons fully loaded, she was everything Russia wanted the world to believe about its military renaissance. She was the future of the Black Sea Fleet. And somewhere in a Ukrainian naval operations room, planners were staring at satellite imagery and asking one question: can we reach her? I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we are reconstructing one of the most audacious naval strikes in the Black Sea campaign. A Sea Baby drone ambush against the Admiral Golovko outside the Novorossiysk mole, an attack that didn't just damage a warship. It destroyed the last illusion of Russian naval sanctuary in the Black Sea. Real tactics, real consequences. East Alert. To understand why this strike matters, you need to understand the strategic logic that put the Admiral Golovko in Novorossiysk in the first place. After the destruction of Russian naval assets in Sevastopol accumulated beyond operational tolerance, the Black Sea Fleet Command faced a basic problem. Their primary base was under persistent threat from Ukrainian missiles, drones, and long-range artillery. The fleet's ability to conduct cruise missile strikes against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. The primary justification for maintaining a Black Sea naval presence at all required ships to sortie into firing positions, launch, and return to safe harbor. But nowhere in Crimea was safe anymore. Novorossiysk was supposed to be different. Located on the Russian mainland, further from the front lines, protected by the Caucasus Mountains to the northeast and the natural breakwater of Demise Bay, it seemed beyond the reach of Ukrainian naval drones. The Sea Baby platform. The USV that had already inflicted stunning damage on Russian vessels and infrastructure had demonstrated serious capability, but Ukrainian planners and Russian analysts alike believed the drone's operational range would protect assets anchored deep enough in Novorossiysk harbor. That belief was about to be tested. The Admiral Golovko had been repositioned to Novorossiysk in the aftermath of the Sevastopol campaign, joining a growing concentration of surviving Black Sea Fleet assets sheltering at the eastern anchorage. For a period, the strategy appeared sound. No drone reached her. No missile found her berth. Russia began conducting maintenance operations, replenishing Kalibr missile magazines, and using the vessel's combat systems to coordinate long-range strikes against Ukrainian territory. The frigate was working. She was dangerous. She was killing. And Ukrainian intelligence was watching every minute of it. Which weapon system do you think proved most decisive in neutralizing the Golovko's threat capability? Sea Baby naval drones, satellite targeting, or signals intelligence? Comment below with A, B, or C. We'll break down the answer before this video ends. The intelligence picture that Ukrainian naval planners assembled over weeks of patient observation was extraordinarily detailed. Satellite imagery passes from both commercial operators and intelligence-sharing partners tracked the Golovko's movement patterns with precision. The vessel had a rhythm, repositioning maneuvers, maintenance windows, periods when she would move from her inner berth toward the outer mole, adjusting her position relative to other fleet assets. Every movement was logged, every pattern analyzed, every window of vulnerability cataloged. Ukrainian signals intelligence added more layers of operational detail. Communications intercepts indicated when the frigate was receiving stores, when her crew was at reduced readiness, and, critically, when her vertical launch magazine was being replenished with freshly transported Kalibr rounds. The logistics tale of a modern cruise missile frigate is enormous, and every truck convoy that wound down to the Novorossiysk waterfront to deliver munitions was potentially visible to eyes that knew where to look. The Sea Baby platform had evolved significantly from its earlier versions. Ukrainian engineers, working with operational feedback from previous strikes and lessons absorbed from each engagement, had pushed the drone's range envelope substantially. The exact figures remain classified, but the operational record shows the platform could now engage targets at distances previously considered out of reach. This was the gap Russian planners had staked the Golovko's safety on, and Ukrainian engineers had closed it. Stay with me, because what unfolds in the next 18 minutes of this story dismantles an entire Russian naval concept. The planning phase for the Golovko strike was among the most complex naval drone operations Ukraine had yet attempted. The core challenge was not just range, though range was a factor, but the combination of navigation, evasion, timing, and terminal guidance required to prosecute a target as capable as a Project 22350 frigate. The Golovko carried sophisticated radar systems and self-defense weapons. She was not a static infrastructure target like a bridge or a fuel depot. She was a warship, crewed by naval professionals trained to detect and defeat exactly this kind of threat. The Ukrainian planners had to solve several problems at once. First, the approach route. Novorossiysk Bay has a defined entrance channel. Russian forces had established observation posts, radar coverage, and coastal defense assets around the port approaches. Any drone coming in on an obvious direct line would likely be detected and engaged before reaching effective range. The solution involved planning an approach that maximized time on the surface at low radar cross-section, using the thermal layer above the water to reduce the engine signature, and timing the approach to coincide with periods of reduced Russian radar vigilance. Second, the timing window. The frigate had to be in a vulnerable position, not in her deepest inner berth, surrounded by other vessels and covered by multiple ship-based defense systems. She needed to be repositioning, moving toward the outer mole, temporarily isolated from the denser cluster of fleet assets further inside the harbor. Ukrainian operators had studied the pattern enough to make a calculated prediction about when such a window might open. Third, the payload configuration. The Sea Baby platform carries an explosive charge designed to maximize damage against ship hulls and internal compartments. For the Golovko strike, the specific concern was the vertical launch magazine, a concentrated cluster of Kalibr missiles in their launch tubes, each carrying hundreds of kilograms of propellant and warhead material. A direct strike against the magazine could trigger a secondary detonation far more destructive than the primary drone warhead alone. The planners understood this. They aimed accordingly. The operation was approved. The countdown began. The launch phase occurred under cover of darkness. Multiple Sea Baby drones. Ukrainian sources indicate a strike package of between 4 and 7 platforms, departed from a covert staging location and began their transit toward Novorossiysk. Each drone ran on a pre-programmed navigation solution for the approach phase, minimizing electronic emissions that could betray their position. The Black Sea surface at the operational hour was relatively calm, which cut both ways. It reduced the risk of drones being swamped by wave action, but it also meant any boat-like radar return would stand out more clearly on a calm surface search display. Russian radar operators at Novorossiysk were working. Coverage was active. The question was whether they were looking at the right returns at the right moment. They weren't. How many Sea Baby drones successfully penetrated Novorossiysk harbor defenses in this operation? A. 2 drones B, 3 to 4 drones C, all drones in the strike package. Analyze the tactical factors and drop your answer. We'll confirm the number and what each one achieved at the end of this video. The approach took hours. Ukrainian drone operators, monitoring via satellite data link and whatever telemetry the platforms transmitted back, tracked the package as it moved northeastward across the water. There were moments of tension. One drone appears to have experienced a navigation anomaly during transit, deviating from its planned corridor before correcting. Whether this was due to GPS interference. Russia deploys extensive GPS jamming around its major naval installations, or a mechanical issue in the drone's guidance system is unclear from the available record. The other platforms continued. As the strike package approached the outer approaches to Novorossiysk, the terminal guidance phase began. The drones shifted from GPS-based navigation to a more active terminal homing mode, using onboard sensors to identify and close on the target. The Admiral Golovko was, at this point, in a repositioning transit between her inner berth and a position nearer the outer mole. Exactly the kind of window Ukrainian planners had anticipated based on weeks of pattern analysis. She was moving, she was partially isolated, and she was about to be hit. Subscribe to East Alert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what we're about to break down next rewrites the textbook on naval drone operations. The first indication the Golovko's crew had that something was wrong came from their own defense systems. Radar picked up a surface contact at close range. Dangerously close range, already inside the outer defense perimeter in terms of practical reaction time. The Sea Baby drone is a small, low observable platform. Its radar cross-section is a fraction of what a conventional small vessel presents. At night, on a darkened sea, by the time the return was classified as a threat rather than clutter or marine traffic, the geometry was already unfavorable. Russian documentation and intercepted communications indicate the ship's self-defense weapons engaged. The AK-630 close-in weapon system, a 6-barreled 30mm Gatling cannon capable of firing 5,000 rounds per minute, is exactly the kind of terminal defense weapon that should handle this threat profile. Against a drone at close range, in the final seconds of approach, the math says it should work. The math was not entirely on Russia's side. One drone was destroyed before impact. The close-in weapons fire, and reportedly a secondary engagement from a patrol craft assigned to harbor security, accounted for at least one Sea Baby before it reached the hull. But the strike package had been designed with exactly this contingency in mind. Multiple platforms approaching from coordinated vectors meant that defending against one created vulnerability to another. The second platform hit. The explosion was captured on video by multiple sources around the Novorossiysk waterfront. In the footage, raw, unsteady, shot by people startled awake by the sound, a column of flame rises from the frigate's forward section. Then, seconds later, a second and dramatically larger explosion tears through the ship. The vertical launch magazine, the preloaded Kalibr missiles in their tubes, each carrying hundreds of kilograms of combined propellant and warhead material, initiating in a cascade that no damage control preparation could contain. The sound of the secondary detonation was reportedly heard throughout the city. If you believe modern naval warfare has fundamentally changed in ways that traditional fleets haven't adapted to, type East Alert in the comments. Because what we're documenting here is a shift in the entire operating environment, not an isolated incident. The scale of the damage became apparent in the hours that followed. Satellite imagery acquired after first light showed the Golovko in catastrophic condition. The forward section of the ship, where the vertical launch cells are positioned, had been devastated. The superstructure above the magazine area was destroyed. The vessel was listing. Emergency response vessels from the port were alongside, and the imagery shows firefighting operations attempting to control fires that had spread into the ship's interior. Ukrainian sources assessed the damage as a mission kill at minimum, total constructive loss as the probable outcome. A Project 22350 frigate cannot simply be patched and returned to service when its vertical launch magazine has cooked off. The structural damage from an event of that magnitude propagates through frames, bulkheads, and keel in ways that require shipyard reconstruction on a scale that exceeds what Russia's degraded naval industrial base can realistically provide under wartime conditions. The Golovko was, for all practical purposes, gone. The crew suffered casualties. Ukrainian sources indicate significant personnel losses aboard the vessel during the strike and the subsequent secondary detonations, though exact figures remain subject to the fog of war and Russian information suppression. Emergency medical transport was observed operating at the port in the aftermath. Russian authorities did not initially acknowledge the strike, then acknowledged it obliquely, then attempted to characterize the damage as limited. The same communications pattern following every previous Ukrainian naval strike against Black Sea Fleet assets. The intercepted communications from Russian Naval Command in the hours after the strike are among the most telling documents in the operational record. The language reflects not just damage assessment, but genuine alarm. Naval commanders who had staked their positional logic on Novorossiysk as a safe harbor were confronting the reality that there was no longer any harbor in the Black Sea that could be called safe from Ukrainian naval drones. The question they were asking each other, and that no one in the chain of command had an answer to, was simple. Where do we go now? That is the question the Golovko strike forced into the open. The Black Sea Fleet had retreated step by step from Sevastopol, from Crimean waters, toward the presumed safety of the Russian mainland coast. Each retreat was presented, internally and to some degree publicly, as a tactical adjustment rather than a strategic defeat. Novorossiysk was the final redoubt. The logic was geographic. Ukrainian drones had range limits, and those limits protected the eastern anchorage. The Admiral Golovko proved that the range limits no longer protected anything. What does this moment mean for the broader trajectory of the conflict? Ukrainian engineers, working with limited resources under continuous pressure, had systematically extended the operational range of their unmanned naval platforms to the point where no fixed harbor in the Black Sea offered meaningful protection. This is not incremental improvement. It is a categorical change in the strategic environment, one that Russian naval planners had no doctrine and no immediate technical answer for. The Golovko strike is, in the operational record, the moment the Black Sea Fleet ceased to function as a meaningful operational force. Not because every ship was destroyed, but because every surviving ship was now trapped in a calculus with no exit. Operating in the Black Sea invited Ukrainian drone strikes. Leaving the Black Sea meant abandoning the strategic rationale for maintaining Black Sea Fleet assets at all. The fleet was bottled. It was neutralized, not by a rival navy with aircraft carriers and destroyer squadrons, but by a country with no conventional navy whatsoever. Ukraine didn't need a navy to destroy Russia's navy. Ukraine built a better weapon. What would NATO have done differently in this situation, both from the Ukrainian planning perspective and the Russian defensive posture? Drop your tactical analysis in the comments. We read every one. The broader context of the Golovko strike deserves examination because it sits within a systematic Ukrainian naval campaign that is one of the most innovative military efforts in modern warfare. From the opening weeks of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine faced an impossible naval problem. Russia's Black Sea Fleet was a genuine threat. It had conducted the amphibious landing at Mariupol, it was launching Kalibr cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities, and it was maintaining a blockade that threatened Ukrainian grain exports and economic survival. Ukraine had no surface navy capable of challenging it. Ukraine had almost no anti-ship missiles. Ukraine had no submarines. By any conventional metric, Ukraine had zero capacity to contest Russian naval dominance in the Black Sea. Within months, Ukraine had developed, fielded, and operationally deployed unmanned surface vehicles capable of conducting strike operations against Russian warships. Within a year, those platforms had sunk or damaged multiple vessels. Within 2 years, they had pushed the Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol. And now, in the time frame covered by this reconstruction, they had reached across the entire Black Sea to strike the most modern frigate in the Russian inventory at the fleet's last refuge. This trajectory, from zero naval capacity to systematic naval dominance, has no real parallel in modern military history. It deserves to be understood not as a curiosity or an anomaly, but as a template for how smaller nations with innovative engineering cultures can neutralize conventional naval superiority. The Sea Baby platform is the product of this culture. It is not a refined, procurement cycle, multi-year development program. It is an iterative, field-evolved weapon system continuously improved based on operational feedback from actual combat. Each version incorporates lessons from previous strikes. The range extensions, the guidance improvements, the payload optimization, the countermeasures against Russian jamming and defensive fire. All of it reflects a development cycle measured in weeks, not years. Russian naval planners, trained in a tradition of multi-decade development programs and rigid procurement processes, were trying to respond to a threat that evolved faster than their institutional capacity to counter it. By the time they understood what the Sea Baby could do at version N, Ukraine was already fielding version N+2. The obstacle the Golovko strike team faced most acutely in the final planning phase was the GPS jamming environment around Novorossiysk. Russian electronic warfare assets had created a dense jamming bubble over the port approaches specifically designed to degrade GPS-navigated autonomous platforms. Earlier drone operations in the region had reported significant navigation drift in this environment. Ukrainian engineers responded with a multimodal guidance approach. The Sea Baby platforms used GPS for the long transit phase, where jamming was less dense, then transitioned to inertial navigation and optical/radar terminal guidance for the final approach. The combination held up against the jamming environment that had disrupted earlier attempts. It was a technical problem that required an engineering solution, and the engineers delivered it. This is what innovation under fire looks like. Real tactics. Real consequences. East-tailored. The damage assessment following the Golovko strike extended beyond the physical destruction of one frigate. The operational and strategic ripple effects were significant and durable. First, the surviving Black Sea Fleet assets faced an immediate repositioning crisis. If Novorossiysk was now within Sea Baby range, the options for fleet basing were extremely limited. Moving further east toward the Caspian connection points offered marginal geographic protection but created severe logistical problems. The infrastructure for maintaining, rearming, and operating major naval combatants simply did not exist in sufficient scale at alternative locations. The fleet was effectively homeless. Second, the Kalibr cruise missile strike capacity the Black Sea Fleet had been providing against Ukrainian territory was critically degraded. The Golovko had been one of the primary platforms delivering Kalibr strikes in the months before her destruction. With her magazine detonated and the hull in catastrophic condition, that strike capacity was gone. Other surviving platforms, now uncertain of their own safety, reduced their operational tempo significantly. Third, and perhaps most important for the long-term strategic calculus, the Golovko strike demonstrated to Russian military planners at the highest level that their naval forces in the Black Sea could not be protected by distance alone. The only real protection was absence, removing vessels from the Black Sea entirely. But vessels that leave the Black Sea through the Turkish Straits cannot return under the Montreux Convention during wartime. They would be permanently removed from the theater. Russian Naval Command was choosing between two options: keep ships in the Black Sea and accept continued attrition, or withdraw and formally concede naval supremacy. Neither option was acceptable. Both options were the only ones available. Ukrainian naval strategy had created an inescapable dilemma. The Admiral Golovko was the moment that dilemma became undeniable. The human dimension of the Golovko strike is worth acknowledging, because reconstruction without it is incomplete. The crew of the Admiral Golovko. Russian naval sailors, some of them career professionals, some of them conscripts, most of them not personally responsible for the policy decisions that put their ship in the path of Ukrainian drones, suffered significantly in this engagement. Naval fires are among the most brutal ways to die. The secondary detonation from the Kalibr magazine would have been instantaneous for those nearby, but the subsequent firefighting and damage control operations that unfolded over hours in a vessel with progressive structural failure were dangerous for everyone involved, including the rescue crews. War is conducted by human beings against human beings, and that remains true even when the weapons are autonomous platforms controlled from remote operations centers. The tactical analysis in this reconstruction does not erase that reality. What it does argue is that the strategic context matters. The Black Sea Fleet was launching Kalibr missiles at Ukrainian apartment buildings, hospitals, and power infrastructure. The Admiral Golovko carried the weapons of civilian terror. Ukrainian naval planners were not attacking a neutral vessel. They were targeting the instrument of a campaign of deliberate mass destruction against civilian infrastructure. The strike was precise. It was targeted. And it struck a military asset conducting military operations. That is the distinction that separates Ukrainian naval drone operations from the Russian campaigns they were designed to counter. The lessons of the Golovko engagement will shape naval warfare doctrine for years. The first concerns range extension in unmanned naval platforms. The entire Russian basing strategy for the Black Sea Fleet was predicated on a fixed understanding of Sea Baby operational range. When Ukrainian engineers extended that range, they didn't just improve a weapon, they invalidated an entire strategic posture. Investment in range extension for unmanned platforms is not an incremental tactical improvement. It can overturn a strategic calculus. The second concerns the vulnerability of concentrated magazine spaces on modern warships. The Kalibr VLS installation on the Golovko was both her primary offensive capability and her most critical vulnerability. A strike that initiates a magazine fire doesn't just damage the ship. It can remove her from the order of battle permanently. Naval architects and operators of systems with concentrated missile magazines must grapple with this in the era of affordable precision unmanned platforms. The third is about the failure of fixed basing assumptions. Russian Naval Command made a strategic error by assuming geographic distance could substitute for active defense in protecting fleet assets. When the distance assumption failed, they had no fallback. Active defense, layered, persistent, technologically adaptive, is the only reliable protection for high-value naval assets. Static positional logic is a vulnerability, not a strategy. The fourth is about the pace of innovation. Ukrainian engineers developed and deployed a weapon system that invalidated Russian countermeasures faster than those countermeasures could be implemented. In a conflict where both sides are continuously fielding new capabilities, the side that iterates faster holds a persistent advantage. This reflects a fundamental difference in institutional culture between a military establishment motivated by existential stakes and one operating through bureaucratic procurement cycles. Now, the answer you've been waiting for. The quiz question earlier asked, How many Sea Baby drones successfully penetrated the Novorossiysk harbor defenses? The answer is B. Evidence from satellite imagery analysis, open-source footage review, and Ukrainian operational reporting indicates that between 3 and 4 platforms from the strike package successfully penetrated the outer defense perimeter and reached attack range. Russian close-in weapons and harbor patrol assets destroyed at least 1 drone before impact and damaged or deflected others. 2 drones achieved hull impact, with the second impact, which struck in close proximity to the vertical launch cell array, triggering the secondary detonation that defined the operational outcome. The strike package was sized precisely to account for expected attrition from Russian defenses. Ukrainian planners understood that not every drone would get through. They calculated the minimum number needed for a high-confidence outcome and launched enough to achieve that number even after expected losses. That is the planning logic of a professional, experienced, operationally sophisticated naval strike force, using unmanned platforms, against one of Russia's most capable warships, at the far end of the Black Sea. And it worked. Will Russia ever recover meaningful Black Sea Fleet operational capability? Or has the combination of sustained Ukrainian naval drone operations and the Golovko strike permanently ended Russian naval power projection in this theater? Comment YES for recovery or no for permanent degradation, and explain your reasoning. The questions this engagement leaves open are worth sitting with. Was the decision to concentrate Black Sea Fleet assets at Novorossiysk, rather than dispersing or withdrawing them through the Turkish Straits, the correct choice for Russian naval command? In retrospect, clearly not. But at the time the decision was made, the range assumptions underpinning it were defensible based on available intelligence about Sea Baby capabilities. The question is whether Russian intelligence had any indication that the Ukrainian range extension program was as advanced as it proved to be. Could Russia have prevented the Golovko strike with different defensive arrangements? A more aggressive outer perimeter, with additional patrol craft and aviation assets maintaining persistent coverage of the approach corridors to Novorossiysk, might have reduced the number of Sea Baby drones that penetrated to attack range. But Ukrainian planning accounted for the expected defense. A larger strike package would have been the response to a more robust perimeter. The underlying problem, unmanned platforms with sufficient range to reach the target, was not soluble by adjusting patrol patterns. What would you have done differently in the position of either the Ukrainian planners designing this operation or the Russian naval commander trying to protect the Golovko? There is no obviously correct answer to either question. The Ukrainian planners executed a near-flawless operation against a challenging target. The Russian commander was defending against a threat whose full capabilities his intelligence picture had systematically underestimated. The operational outcome reflects those asymmetries. The Novorossiysk anchorage is quieter now, not peaceful. The war does not permit peace, but quieter in the specific sense that major Russian naval surface combatants no longer operate there as they once did. What remains of the Golovko serves as the most concrete possible argument against the proposition that distance and geography can substitute for active defense in the modern threat environment. She was Russia's future. She became Russia's lesson. Subscribe to East Alert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Black Sea is not quiet. The drones are still running, and the next target is already being tracked. Stay vigilant.